You're listening to Convenience Matters, brought to you by NACS. Whether it's for food, fuel, drinks, or snacks, about half of the U.S. population shops at a convenience store every day. We'll talk about what we see at stores and what the future may hold for our industry.
Convenience stores sell a lot of stuff, a lot of things you can eat and a lot of things you can drink. And one of the things that we do sell is alcoholic beverages, beer, wine, spirits. Depending on what part of the country or where you are, you might be able to sell some or all. And we're going to talk a little bit about what we're seeing in the spirit industry and the wine industry, what some shifts in consumer behavior has been since COVID, and also what we can expect in the future. Welcome to Convenience Matters. I'm Carolyn Schnare with NACS.
And I'm Jeff Lenard with NACS. And today we welcome Brandy Rand. She is COO of Americas at IWSR and going to take us through some of the trends related to wine and spirits. And Brandy, in setting up just a discussion, I really want to start with driving through, I think it was Tennessee in 2012, driving on a video shoot. And we passed this Shell station, which was essentially a Shell station liquor store. It was really something I've never really seen before. I think it was called Macadoodles. And it was, I think, Kentucky, Tennessee border, something like that. And since then noticed more about how not every convenience, this was basically a liquor store that had a gas station, but more convenience stores are getting into spirits in particular. We know about the wine trends. And I want to start with spirits. What are the broader trends related to spirits that you're seeing in overall, and how might they be playing out in our industry in particular, which is a whole long way of saying welcome, but we'll start with that. And thanks for joining us today, Brandy.
Well, thank you very much for having me. And you are talking about one of my favorite subjects. Without dating myself, I have been in the beverage alcohol industry for about 20 years, and most of my career has been focused in the spirits industry. So that's a really great question. And I think if we go back, and 20 years is not that far ago in terms of looking at the evolution of spirits, and we're in the middle of a golden age, I think, of a cocktail renaissance. It's been happening for some time. So when you look at the growth of spirits and the spirits industry, it's been stealing share from beer and even growing against wine year over year over year. And it's really unprecedented if you look at the number of new brands and categories and flavors and the cocktail culture that's evolved over the past 20 years. Talking about how that's changed, I used to work at a company where we were, looking at trying to get people to make a mojito, bartenders. And at the time, people said, using fresh mint in a drink, that's crazy. Because you didn't have fresh ingredients at bars and restaurants, and everything was much more basic. And now you have, you could go to Tennessee or Kansas or Alaska and order a Manhattan or an old fashioned or a Negroni. And these are all classic cocktails that have become much more mainstream to the point now where we've evolved to some of these even being available in cans.
Cans. That's certainly a new change because we first saw that with beer, and originally it was like, well, the better beers weren't in cans, and then I think Sam Adams was among the first to say, okay, yeah, we're going to go to cans, and then you saw wine in cans, and now it's spirits in cans. And are you talking about the higher alcohol spirits? Are you talking about the kind that are in that 6%, 7% range that may have vodka? But they're kind of a size of a beer, but in roughly the same alcohol content, but they're spirits and they're not a malt beverage.
Yeah, there's a huge evolution, and we sort of look at all of this as the ready to drink category, whether it's malt based, wine based, or spirits based, and it's very interesting, and you brought up a great point. And I think one of the biggest changes you've seen over the last, 10, 15, 20 years in terms of beverage alcohol consumption is consumers have become much more curious, much more educated, and much more open to things like alternative packaging and demand for flavors. And that's really driven this sort of snobbery that might have been associated with, man, I'm not going to drink a bottle of wine unless it's presented to me, with white gloves and someone opening it and sniffing a cork and that whole pomp and circumstance. While there's a time and a place for that, I think you've had an evolution where people say, hey, listen, I want to be able to drink what I want to drink, where I want to drink it, when I want to drink it. And as long as there's a perceived quality, I want to be able to go camping and take a good bottle of wine. And in this case, the bottle is now transferred to cans. So that same mentality has really evolved and moved into not only the growth of the ready to drink category, but these canned cocktails that I mentioned. And particularly during COVID, we've seen a huge growth, double, triple digits in terms of not only RTDs and hard seltzers, but canned cocktails. And it's just this natural evolution of people saying, wait a second, I want to still have a really good, high quality drink, but I want it to be convenient.
So when you look at sorry, Carolyn, just one follow-up question on the cans and liquor is, are you able to, in all 50 states, sell these cans and, the 6-7% alcohol type mixed drinks? And what about the other liquors? Are there restrictions that limit what can happen in other states where you may not be able to take advantage of the opportunity, whether it's traditional spirits that are higher alcohol content or these cans?
The state by state laws for what you can and can't sell are a complex, probably a whole other hour of conversation. And I'm certainly not a lawyer in that regard, but I will say that, yes, I think every channel has depends on your license. Are you licensed to have beer, wine, or spirits? Are you beer only? Are you wine only? And what is a canned cocktail? What is the alcohol base? And then what is the sort of the ABV or percentage? So there's a whole lot of, in terms of the distribution element, state by state. But overall, I think that most of the products that we're seeing across canned cocktails are lower ABV in general, just because that's how they are typically served in that category.
That makes sense with the ABV, because I know here in Virginia where I live, you can't buy spirits at a grocery store, but I can buy canned mixed cocktails. I found one the other day that was so that actually brings me another thought. There's the craft category of these things that probably didn't used to exist that long ago. When I was down on vacation, I drove somewhere in Virginia, and there's this area where there's a lot of breweries and cideries and distilleries. One of the breweries now does all the things, and they built a distillery. Now they can the cocktails, and it's really great. And one of them I was looking at in their store, it's like watermelon, basil, things that I wouldn't put into a cup normally with vodka. And I was like, oh, that sounds beautiful. Now, normally if I was making something for myself at home, it would probably be as boring and basic as possible because I'm lazy. But, like you said, you're not going to the bar now because of COVID. You're not maybe going out to dinner often, or if at all, that you can be your own bartender and be like, look at this fancy cocktail I just made out of this can.
Yeah, and I think that we've seen sort of this trend with at-home consumption, because I get asked a lot, right, with this sort of COVID impact. Everyone says, oh, everyone's drinking at home now. And if you look at the types of purchasing that was going on, and the people sort of drinking at home more and becoming home bartenders, again, this was something that was sort of has been happening for many, many years. And there's just more attention or an acceleration of that existing trend. I mean, you could buy really good barware. And I look back over the last, decade or so where, buying fancy mixing glasses and shakers and, stirrers and, Japanese barware and large ice cube makers and all that was stuff that was at a bar or restaurant. And suddenly you can go to any major retail store or online or any catalog, and you can buy a lot of these tools to make yourself sort of a better bartender at home. And again, I think we went through this evolution of people making it old fashioned and having all of the right tools. And that's still, I think, very important. And now it's sort of jumped to, well, if I can get a really good old fashioned in a canner that's more convenience, that's okay too. So there's been a democratization, I feel like, across beverage alcohol that's really exciting, and also a reflection of consumer behavior and sort of the times that we're in general, and what people are wanting to try and expecting from their products.
And also, I think it continues the trend of people looking at craft beers because they're pairing it with a upscale dinner, whether they're getting takeout food or whether they're fixing something at home. Same with wine, same with the spirits. And I imagine that the take-home sales also can be influenced by, regardless of channel that you're selling it from, if you can kind of position it more as it's not just a bottle, but we're going to create an experience. Because in this current COVID environment, I think a lot of people are kind of selecting who's in their bubble beyond their immediate family. I trust these neighbors or this, and a very, very small bubble in many cases, but those are the people that they might invite over. And it's like, hey, let's just have a couple cocktails and we can play a board game. We can do something like that. Or maybe we can still be in the backyard and be a little bit more distant. But it allows that little bit of, hey, I created some nice food. And also let's pair it with something that we may not have tried before in terms of wine or spirits or a new recipe. And so are you seeing the idea where people can kind of take it to something beyond it's just a bottle, but it's an experience?
100%. I mean, and I think you bring up another really good point during this era is the whole single serve, especially during COVID. The demand for single serve is important because when you are going to a gathering, you're usually bringing your own stuff with you. So we've seen and has been growth in sort of the single serve or small sizes, which is really important. But to answer your question in terms of the experience, yes, I mean, that's been a huge driver of beverage alcohol trends in terms of the quality of the product, the presentation, and the discovery of new brands and new flavors, and being able to share, hey, let me make an Aperol Spritz for you as part of it. And there's a big social media element to this too, where people are sharing the things that they're discovering. They're hunting down the really hard to find, whiskeys, bourbons, and sharing that with people, or they're experimenting with making, a cocktail. And it's become a huge part of the experience, which is why I think, in this COVID environment, particularly with a lot of that initially taking place at the bars and restaurants, the industry was sort of stopped and said, gosh, what's going to happen now if you take away the ability to visit a craft tasting room or go and chat up your favorite bartender and ask for recommendations? And it's been really interesting to look at the US and compared to other markets and how resilient the US market has been during COVID with beverage alcohol trends, and how some of these things, again, have accelerated and even kind of blown everyone's expectations in terms of consumption levels of what people are doing and drinking more at home, and really getting involved in virtual tastings, virtual wine tours, and all the kind of really interesting things that you're seeing producers do.
Leave it to us Americans to do things well. We got drinking down. When you say us versus, the US versus the rest of the world, I'm not going to put you on the spot for like percentages, but what caliber are you talking about? Like how much better we're doing at this out-home drinking than everybody else?
I like, how much better are we at drinking than the rest of the world? So I think, so the way to look at this, and this is a tough question to answer, because something that everyone's talking about is, oh my gosh, everyone's locked out at home and they're drinking, and, it's crazy and out of control. And you have to put things in context, right? Because there's a million, factors, right? So we already know that the transfer of spending that you might have had going to, paying for entertainment tickets or sporting events or going to the movies or going out to eat a couple of times a week. So that extra income, or even buying clothes and things, right? All of that disposable extra income, you see sort of a transference of saying, well, I used to go to a bar or restaurant and pay, $12 for a glass of Pinot Noir with my meal. I can actually go and buy a bottle of Pinot Noir, which is 4 glasses, for $20. And there's a lot of that trade up where people are rationalizing how they're spending and transferring sort of that spend towards beverage alcohol, which in turn has shown a big increase at retail or off-premise sales. And that's a transference. So in the industry, we've always talked about there has to be a certain level of increased spending at the off-premise to make up for the on-premise. And depending on the brand and the category and the subcategory, it doesn't always even out. But to answer your question, the key thing about the US compared to other markets is that traditionally, if you look at total beverage alcohol sales, roughly 80% of beverage alcohol sales have always taken place at retail in the US. In other markets like China, for example, or the UK, it's split more 50-50, where out-of-home consumption, meaning bar and restaurant or on-premise consumption, is upwards of 50%. So when the lockdowns happened in a market like the UK, for example, which is a huge pub and beer market, that's 50% of those sales sort of that just stopped. And so even though people might have been drinking more at home, to try to make up for that volume is just very difficult. So I always got lots of questions from our international clients. And when we look at, we track 160 countries in terms of beverage alcohol consumption. And we were pretty bullish on the ability for the US to sort of do well during COVID because of that 80-20 on-off split. And in some cases, it was even better than we expected in terms of the forecasted growth. And some categories just sort of surprised, I think, the industry in terms of how much they grew during COVID or despite COVID and the on-premise shutdowns.
When you look at sales now over the last 6 months, and we've seen this in convenience stores, there's a little bit more in the way of higher rings per visit. For, let's just say, beer sales, somebody might be more likely to buy an 18-pack than a 6-pack, not because they intend to have 3 times the consumption, but they only have to come back 1/3 as many times in looking at convenience as part of the health element. I want to be safer, so let's take fewer trips. Let's bring some stuff for home. Convenience stores are traditionally more for immediate consumption, once you get home, in the case of something that has an alcohol content. But still, bigger pack sizes, we're seeing more and more. And I'm guessing that the shopping experience is probably a little quicker. You're kind of going in, getting what you need, and you're leaving. So are there opportunities with these trends that are going on, maybe a little bit more in the way of pack size, maybe a little less in the way of lingering in a store because you just kind of want to get it and go? But what are possible opportunities for any retailer? Better if you have suggestions for convenience stores on how they can maybe look at some of these trends. And also the idea that you had also mentioned earlier is the idea of surprise, putting something new there that can make people go home and make it Instagram worthy. So I guess the question is, what about the volume? What about the shopping experience time? And what about the experience in kind of painting a picture for retailers?
So you're right in that people are, at the beginning of COVID, certainly we're buying, not shopping. And even now, I think I just saw on the news the other day, you have to, for the holiday shopping season, you're supposed to make like an appointment to go to the mall, to go shopping. So everything that we do now has changed, right? And people aren't browsing and shopping. They're not spending a day wandering the aisles. We have seen a huge, talk about trends, e-commerce. Now we are in a 3-tier system, but e-commerce for alcohol has quickly, grown. I mean, doubled versus anyone's expectations during COVID, because everybody started buying things online. There was a very low awareness in the US compared to other markets that you could buy alcohol online. And again, it varies state by state, law by law, like it's very complex, but the reality is that more and more people are asking for delivery or wanting to do ordering on their phone and going to pick things up. So that's really changed the whole shopping experience in general. And I think in terms of elements of surprise, and when you're looking at the convenience channel in particular, certainly people are going in and there's more of an impulse buy. And I think that oftentimes, we've seen this across other channels, is there's a idea that you should sort of carry the known brands, and people have been gravitating towards brands they know. But at the same time, the element of surprise would be to actually carry innovative new products. Particularly, we talked about, ready to drink, cocktails, single serve, but quality brands. People are spending more. I mean, this has been going on. The premiumization trend has been going on for years and years and years. And as we look at even during COVID, there's a big expansion in terms of what people are willing to sort of spend, and people are drinking across categories more and more. So it used to be if you were just a beer drinker or just a wine drinker, that's sort of what you could count on. More and more, the same person that drinks a craft beer is also drinking an Irish whiskey, is also drinking, a tequila, is also drinking Prosecco. And sometimes they're drinking across those categories in, one day and one occasion. So looking at your consumer as being curious, willing to try new things, willing to spend more, and offering stuff beyond the sort of status quo what one might expect in the convenience channel, I think is a really good opportunity, particularly as you move into the holiday season, to give people a chance to grab something that they wouldn't expect, that also fits into these ideas of premiumization and the growth across some of these categories.
So do you also local? I mean, is that a big trend as well? Like in the craft beer, craft drinks?
Yeah, that's a great point. Do you know in the last 9 years, we talk about craft distilleries. So back in 2011, there were only about 200 craft distilleries, a little over 200 craft distilleries in the entire US. Now there's over 2,000. Wow. So everybody in every state that you live in is probably within a 10, 15 minute drive of a brewery, a distillery, or a winery, particularly distilleries. And a lot of these distilleries, a majority of them only sell their products in that particular state. And they do come up with really great and innovative products. And people are, particularly as we go to younger generations, people like to shop local. They like knowing where their products come from. They like to support local. And that's a great element, of surprise, as you mentioned, is to start stocking some of these local products, particularly if people are traveling. We know more people are driving, right? People aren't flying as much. So people are driving more and they're stopping more, and the convenience channel, and so to be able to grab something that is from a local, craft distillery or brewery is a great way to really highlight kind of the localness of that particular state or community.
So here in Virginia, I guess you can't really call moonshine. That used to be local way back when when I first moved here, but I don't think that's what we're talking about anymore.
Well, no, it depends. Every state has, a distillery and multiple distilleries, and all of the distilleries do different innovative products. You mentioned, the ready to drink category. That's one that, we work with and do a large craft report every single year. And one of the things we asked a lot of the craft distillers this year was, what are the categories and things that you're interested in, exploring? And we assess sort of what are the categories that are saturated versus the ones that are kind of up and coming. And the cool thing about craft distilleries is that they're almost incubators for innovation. So they try all sorts of really cool things, and they can get things to market much faster than a large company can. So you see a lot of really neat stuff that comes out of distilleries that is limited edition. You can't get it in other states. It's sort of special. And I think that, in particular, the craft channel in general, suffered quite a bit during COVID because, a lot of these folks don't have national distribution at a lot of the, national distribution across retail. And they relied on visitors to tasting rooms or doing on-site sales. And they relied on the on-premise channel. And so their sphere of sort of reach in terms of making up the sales is much smaller than it would be if you're someone who has, national distribution or a large brand. So it's also good to sort of be able to support the continuance of a lot of these craft distilleries and breweries, and support the local.
Yeah, and it's particularly true as we continue the journey with a pandemic and what will be open and who will be able to stay in business. It's always cool to support the local business and see how we can all get through this. I also imagine that with some of these craft distillers and et cetera, that packaging, there's also some fairly unique packaging. I know we've seen it in the beer industry for a while with more and more of these beer cans just going way out there and some really innovative designs and labels on the cans. Are we seeing a little bit of that with some of the more traditional products? Like it doesn't just say vodka in the name of the brand, but there's a little bit of creativity in the label.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I think there's been a huge evolution, and to go back to the ready to drink, the RTD category, that's when I've been, amazed at seeing how much that's premiumized, and then looking at the elements. And you're right, it's been borrowing from what we've seen across craft beer, of taking something that used to be a premixed margarita in a can and was nothing special, and kind of blended it on the shelf and making it much more premium, more interesting. And that is really speaks to sort of how that category is evolving. And it's a huge, trend that we don't expect to slow down. I mean, just for context, and I like to give the stats that blows people's minds. Last year at the end of 2019, just hard seltzers, which we look at as part of, again, that ready to drink category, were larger than the entire vodka category in the United States. And vodka is the biggest spirits category in the US by volume. So if you look at just pure volume share, vodka is huge compared to all the other spirits categories. So for hard seltzers within a couple of years to be bigger than vodka was sort of eye-opening, I think, for a lot of us in the industry. Then coming to 2020, during COVID, with all of these new ready-to-drink products and canned cocktails and all the hard seltzers and wine spritzers and everything that's out there going gangbusters, up 100%, right, in terms of sales, the entire RTD category in the US is going to be bigger than the entire spirits category. So I'm going to say that again. The RTD category, literally will be bigger than all spirits. So vodka, whiskey, gin, all of those together by the end of this year. It's astounding when I saw those sort of numbers and how we're predicting 2020 to end. That's very significant just from a volume perspective. And it says a lot about consumers and what they're looking for and what are the things that are driving them to the ready to drink category. And we touched on a bunch of them, but overall it's really, there's a big interest in some of these niche categories and premium categories and things that are sort of exciting and new that sort of check the box of convenience and single serve and functional benefits. So what's in this can or this bottle, right, that I'm drinking. So it's a very dynamic time for that category in particular.
So if I summarize it for the convenience retailers that are listening to this, there's two takeaways. And one is make space for cans, because we talked to Lester Jones in Cheers for Beers, which was an episode that came out a couple months ago. And he said the same thing about seltzers and the rise of importance in that, especially as we went into the summer months. So canned, ready to drink, and canned seltzer, make room for that in your coolers and everywhere else. And the second one is for everybody, recycle those cans, because I heard there was possibly an aluminum shortage. So if you do drink them, put them in the right place so that they can make it into a can again, because we need more of it on our shelves.
Definitely. Yeah. And I think, in we're doing a lot of consumer work and talking to consumers. And one other thing I think I'll mention that's really relevant to your audience is, and it goes back to that 80-20 split, but when we look at the behaviors that people have exhibited during COVID, sort of the more at-home consumption, that type of consumption, it's not going to you're not going to flip a switch, right, and everything's going to go back to normal. It's going to take years sort of recovery, and there's still very low consumer confidence in going out to the on-premise and kind of going back to how things were. And so we know that alcohol consumption future looks strong, but it could be less likely to take place in the on-premise. So what this means is that there's much more emphasis and I think more focus, certainly for people in the beverage alcohol industry for the retail channel. And when we talk retail, because we're a three-tier system, e-commerce sort of fits in there, right? Because everything has to be, ordered, delivered through sort of the three-tier system here in the U.S. But that means the retail channel, whether it's online buying or buying at any type of a retail store, is going to become more and more important. And I think there's a lot of opportunity to rethink, if I'm a retailer, rethink about how I'm looking at managing my SKUs, the types of products that I'm carrying, and looking at well, the consumer has changed and the demand is higher, and the expectation is the consumer is going to be putting more dollars into the retail channel, then you need to think about how you offer the consumers those things that they typically were spending on in the on-premise channel. And that's recreating that experience, as we've talked about a lot of it at home. So how can you do the ingredients that are part of making cocktails at home? How can you, if you're selling, canned cocktails, are there elements and things you can put together that make it easier for people then to do that spend and recreate that experience at home?
That's a good tip. Smart too, because it's cross merchandising. So Brandy, I've really enjoyed your time with us today. You have some great insights, and I'd love to have you back on. Maybe beginning of next year, we'll have turned a corner on this pandemic and see things rebounding across not only the United States, but across the globe. One can hope. So fingers crossed for that. And I also love when I interview guests who have the names that appropriately match their job. So Brandy is like you fell into the right profession there. I'm sure your parents are happy with the way that went. So thank you for your time. I know the IWSR website, theiwsr.com is the website, has some really great reports that you can access. And I encourage listeners to go check that out, because she's got some great findings on past facts as well as upcoming on COVID research and consumer research. So thank you so much for your time today. We appreciate you taking some time with us, and thank you for listening to Convenience Matters.
Convenience Matters is brought to you by NACS and produced in partnership with Human Factor. For more information, visit convenience.org.